We know that Washington State has its force of a domestic violent extremism task force that is doing nothing except highlighting non-existent right-wing extremism. For some reason, it's still going on. Not only is it still going on, the Attorney General's office wants to give it more money. Let's talk about it in our segment. Unbelievable. All right, so the task force convened again last week. This time, the topic of their meeting was defining domestic violent extremism, which I feel like kind of should have been done before they created the task force in the first place, don't you think? Hey, we're creating a domestic violent extremism task force. Maybe we should have a definition for domestic violent extremism before we spend millions of dollars on it and create a task force under state law. I don't know. But 9 months into it, they're still trying to find a definition for the task force that they're serving on. Right now, their website says there's no universally agreed upon definition of domestic extremism, and the term is undefined in the revised Code of Washington. Okay, so a couple things I want to talk about here, because a lot of the meeting obviously focused around this conversation. Now, one of the members of the task force is Walla Walla County Sheriff Mark Krider, and he chimed in, and I'll give him credit because he tried to explain to the group that the way in which they were going about trying to define domestic violent extremism was the wrong way to do it entirely.
I think that one of the things that hopefully we've identified that it's extremely difficult to define extremism because everybody has a completely different opinion and viewpoint of what is extreme views. We can look at just the abortion issue. Both sides of the abortion issue would be considered extremists by the opposite side. So I think the premise of trying to fix a domestic extremism problem in the state is problematic. In my opinion, there's no way that we can define domestic extremism and come to a resolution on what is the extremism.
Correct. I agree with him. Not if you're trying to do what this task force is doing and define domestic extremism under the umbrella of the views that people hold, rather than the actions they take in pursuit of pushing their views. So what he rightly noticed from this absolute ideologically loony lefty comprised task force is that they were trying to define domestic violent extremism through the lens of what views people hold, not through the lens of the actions that they engage in the pursuit of a political, religious, or social agenda. And so thank God for the sheriff in saying, we can't characterize views as domestic extremism. And that's what they're trying to do. Oh, the right wing, the Moms for Liberty and the anti-abortion crowd. He's like, that is a slippery slope. And it's obviously going to be one-sided because you're going to characterize people as domestic extremists who don't support, boys and girls sports, who support parental rights. Those are going to become domestic extremists under the eyes of the state of Washington and the revised code. He says you can't do that because people can hold views you don't agree with, but that doesn't mean they're breaking the law, and it doesn't mean they're engaged in extremism. He said it's the actions, it's the acts, it's the assaults. And the fact that he even has to explain that to them is genuinely scary. And it's why the Domestic Violent Extremism Task Force shouldn't exist. Because all it is serving to do, and really their mission is, to label conservatives as domestic extremists and to put you on a watch list. That's why they've got the bias crimes hotline, the hate crimes hotline, and all of that. This is all about is a taxpayer-funded witch hunt to go after conservatives for wrongthink. And the sheriff is pointing that out. He's doing it in a very, calm, eloquent way. But I understand the underlying message of what he was trying to say to these crazy people. I don't even know how he's on this task force to begin with. Because these people want to say domestic violent extremism is basically people who hold right-wing views, not someone who might hold a political or social view or a religious view and then, in pursuit of pushing that view, commits a crime. That's really all it is. The definition is very simple. Is people who commit a crime in the pursuit of a political, social, or religious agenda. It is really not that hard to define. But then they're scared because they don't want to label their own side domestic extremists, because to them, violence or vandalism in the pursuit of a progressive idea or a socialist idea isn't domestic extremism. It's justice. It's wild. So there are a couple people who are saying here and there on the task force who I think are aware of some of the pushback that we and others have been giving to the task force because it gets so much attention from the right for obvious reasons. And this cracked me up. So there's a woman, Cynthia Miller Idris, who's a polarization and extremism research innovation lab expert. Okay. And she gets on, and you'll hear her reference it at the end. But she kind of is trying to remind the group that, hey, people watch these meetings. Like, these meetings are public, right? And I think she understands that the extremism task force has been criticized for just ignoring left-wing extremism altogether in favor of non-existent right-wing extremism. And I think she realized that would look really bad to do it at this meeting in light of like the Charlie Kirk assassination and some other very public cases of left-wing violence. Here's what she said.
Folks may have questions about the recent assassination attempt or the ICE attack that happened, or if you haven't seen it, the new CSIS report that's out today about trends in left-wing violence. We can have that conversation. We can have a conversation just in general about the public health approach, what we're seeing, or not. Just if there are questions, and we are on the record in this task force meeting, and so that's something to remember.
See what she's doing? I mean, God bless her. She's like, hey, people are watching. Maybe, I don't know, since we're a domestic extremism task force, I don't know, bring up the single most relevant political assassination in our nation's history, maybe besides MLK Jr. that just happened like a couple weeks ago. I don't know, maybe bring up the shooting at the ICE facility, guys. People are watching. So do you think the room listened? Of course not. Of course they didn't listen. We can't do that. We can't talk about the Charlie Kirk assassination because there are so many more pressing instances of domestic extremism that need our attention, like ICE agents refusing to show their faces. I kid you not. So she's basically telling them, you guys, people are watching. We have to talk about one of these major instances of left-wing extremism. They're like, no, we want to talk about federal agents hiding their faces from the public. Here's a clip.
It is terrible practice for public officials when we're not talking about a COVID situation to mask themselves in order to, make sure their identity is unknown. But right now, there is no law, at least no federal law, that prohibits it. I do think there are some good constitutional arguments that public officials should not be masked. The counter to that, which unfortunately with things like the attack on the ICE facility in Dallas just a couple of days ago, are adding fodder to arguments that DHS is making that their agents are have an 1,000% increase in threats against them, and that it's important for them to mask their identities because they get doxxed and so on and so forth. My own view is when you become a law enforcement officer, this is part of what you accept, that you should comport your behavior in a way that the public finds confidence in, and then you will not have a need to mask yourself.
Did you catch that? She's blaming them. It's ICE agents' fault that they're being shot at and attacked. And if they didn't do what they were doing, they wouldn't have to wear a mask in the first place. And she brings up the shooting at the ICE facility, but only brings it up as a way to say that it gave the Trump administration fodder for their claims that ICE agents need to be masked because they're under attack. This is a task force designed to take a serious look at the problem of domestic violent extremism. And they are more interested in talking about how problematic it is that ICE agents are masking their faces because of threats of violence and doxing than they want to talk about. They're more interested in that than talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination, than talking about the radical left-wing agitators in Portland and Seattle, than talking about attempted murder of ICE agents. They're a joke. It should be disbanded. but it'll never be disbanded because Democrats want it to serve as an excuse to say there's this serious problem with right-wing extremism, so now we need to take all these actions. You know, we need this bias crimes hotline. And then that bias crimes hotline will inflate the numbers of hate and hate crimes, and then they'll use that to continue to justify the domestic violent extremism task force. And then you have people like Nick Brown who'll use their important work to justify what? Asking for more money. He's already in the supplemental budget this year asking for an additional $165,000 for the task force. And that might not sound like a lot, but to me that's a lot. We shouldn't spend a penny on it. We shouldn't spend a penny on something that in a state like Washington, where the vast majority of domestic violent extremism is from the left wing, refuses to even acknowledge that left-wing extremism is happening. I mean, if they were to be taken seriously, what would they be talking about this week? They would be talking about the attacks on signature gatherers. That's domestic extremism. But they can't talk about that because they agree with it. It's insane. What do you even say about it? I just love this woman who, she's been unhinged on the meeting before, so I'm not going to give her too much credit. And she's saying, hey, you can ask questions about all this. No, she should just talk about it. And she should, have a little more cojones to say, you guys, people are watching and you're ignoring these huge instances of left-wing extremism. Why? Like, somebody on the meeting have enough balls to call them out for what they're doing and not sort of try to soft step it.